everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace. For this week's show, we are discussing the movie 1946. I loved it so much, I saw it twice, which I never do. I just don't watch movies twice, but I had to go back a second time. It was that wonderful. It is so good. And I am so honored to chat with one of the key participants at Oxford. Please remember to keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. Thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to all of your comments and questions. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, please grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you have a comment or a question. Thank you in advance, and thank you for welcoming us into your home and joining the conversation. I appreciate you. Okay, let's meet our guest and get smarter. I knew I was forgetting something. There we go. Ed Oxford worked with Campus Crusade for Christ, which is CRU, in the 1990s, serving in Illinois and Tokyo, Japan. After returning to California, he obtained his MDiv from Talbot Seminary and worked on the pastoral staff at Gardenia California Church. Ed resigned to work in finance because hoping to earn enough money to afford reparative therapy. After years of depression and no change, he went to Kathy Baldock's seminar in 2016 and learned that the word homosexual wasn't in the Bible until 1946. With a fervent desire to learn how this happened, he started a journey of intense research. In 2017, he located the Bible translation notes in the archives of Yale, and with Kathy, he made a discovery which led to 1946, the movie, the documentary. I want to graciously and honorably welcome Ed Oxford. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Sherry.
How are
you? Good to see you. Good, thanks. How are you doing?
I am well. I am so glad to get to talk to you about this. I mean, we talked at the showings and stuff like that, but this movie has just grabbed me. I knew about the translation difference about 10 years ago, but I didn't know about the Yale notes. I didn't know about everything that you guys uncovered. So I'm so excited to talk to you and get into this with you.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. Yes.
So let's talk about I don't want any spoilers. Everybody has to go watch this movie. But what started you getting into, what made you want to go meet Kathy? Kathy's going to be on the show when her next book comes out, by the way, everybody. But I want to be like her when I grow up. She is such a powerhouse. I called her a boss bitch, a CEO boss bitch. And I was like, no disrespect. And she's like, I love that. But she really is. So, How did you get even to even hear of her or know that this was going on?
Yeah, Kathy Baldock is definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, there's a gay couple I know named Michael and Michael, and we were all living in Southern California and not excited about the churches we were going to, and we were going to look for an affirming church together. So we would do our research during the week and try to find what church we're going to go to, and then go and participate in that church, and then evaluate it over lunchtime afterwards. And in the course of that research and trying to find Southern California affirming churches, Michael found this video of this lady named Kathy Baldock, and he sent it to me, and he and I would stay awake late at night talking and looking, and I was like, she's incredible. And then we went to a QCF or GCN conference, that's Gay Christian Network, or Q Christian Fellowship conference in Houston, Texas. And Michael and I, the two Michaels and I, we went together, and then he comes over and he says, that lady, that Kathy lady with the really cool videos, she's in the lobby. So we went over and surrounded her like fan club, and we had to stand in line because she had a lot of fans, and just started talking with her. And then I went to a seminar that she was putting on at the conference that weekend, and I was sitting in the second row because I got there early. I wanted to watch this. I was impressed with her videos, and sitting there, and she puts this huge timeline up on the wall. And for these hotel conference rooms, they're usually carpeted, and so it's kind of like, she has this taped timeline up in the wall with all this duct tape. And there's a guy sitting in the front row, and every now and then part of the timeline would fall down. And this guy with the duct tape would run up and go over there and pull out his tape and patch that one up and go and sit down until something else fell down off the carpeted wall. And I just remember sitting there thinking, I am so jealous of this guy. He knows Kathy Baldock well enough to tape up her falling timeline on this wall. And so I was so excited. I said that I was just a fanboy at the time. And so I started talking with her and from here and there and seeing her at various conferences. And when she came to Southern California, they were doing something with the Reformation Project. And so I asked her, I said, hey, do you have a place to stay for the next couple of days? And she said, yeah, I have a hotel. And I said, are you paying for that out of your own pocket? And of course she is, because a lot of this kind of advocacy work, we pay out of our own pocket for lots of things. I said, come and stay at my house. And so she came over and she fell in love with my book collection, because I have a lot of old books and Bibles and commentaries and dictionaries and things like that I've collected for this very research. And so we just hit it off, and the rest is history.
That is so beautiful. I mean, I would totally fangirl too. You know, I would. I totally would. I mean, a little bit of a backstory. So like I said, I found out about the alterations about 10 years ago, maybe 12. And I was following gaychristians101.com. His name is Rick. And I had a show last year. We were talking about the, homosexuality and I've done a lot of shows on it, but the timeline came up and I brought it up and I showed his translation and what he had done for all of it, where it changed in all the years, and 46 was missing. Excuse me. And there was like 5 people during the show went, wait a minute, where's 1946? And at that point, I hadn't even realized that 1946 was gone. And so I had to reach out to Rick the next day. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? Long story short, we're not friends anymore. But I was able to update my book and say, no, this was actually, I think he had 57 or something in that. And it was in the 50s that I had heard, or maybe 48. But you guys really came up with 46 and was able to narrow it down to the notes, which was just fascinating.
Yes.
Briefly, again, no spoilers, because I want everybody to see this, but how did you get from fangirling with Kathy to Yale?
Okay, so we had become, and by the way, just so you know, the first, I have it right behind me here, there's the blue one over there, is the 1946 Revised Standard Version, New Testament, the first Bible to ever have the word homosexual in the verse. And then, because we've done a lot of research, and there's a lot of research to do, the first Bible to ever have the word homosexual in it is in the footnote of a 1945 Berkeley version. And that's by Dr. Verkel, who did that one. And so I also have a copy of that as well. Wow. But that wasn't really in the verse. So it wasn't in the verse until 1946. So what happened was I had gone to a Kathy Baldock seminar, and I kept going to every seminar. And the interesting thing is she's always putting on seminars, and you can go to each of her seminars and you might hear some same things, but you're going to hear all kinds of new material, because Kathy, like myself today, we're constantly researching. I will probably be researching for the rest of my life.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm always finding something new. So if I have 2 different seminars that are 3 weeks apart, during that 3-week period, I'm probably going to be integrating new material that I have just discovered that's going to really help put more pieces of this huge puzzle together. And so having gone to seminary and not knowing that this word homosexual is not in the Bible till 1946, I think had a bigger impact on me than maybe the average person, because I was like, what? I should know better, because, I paid all this extra money to go to seminary and so forth. But honestly, during seminary, I was too closeted to ask any questions. Because it might put too much reflection on me. So I dared not ask anything about homosexuality. And that topic hardly ever came up. And if it did, I would just kind of sit in my seat silently and watch other people carry on conversation about it. And so basically, I remember I couldn't let that rest, because that seemed so recent, 1946. And there are people still alive that were working jobs in 1946. And maybe there's someone alive today who was taking notes, messages and notes and everything during that during the days that they were putting that piece together. And maybe I could find this person. So what I started doing was, because Kathy, what she had done, she had studied that, she realized, she knew that there were 22 translators. They were all men. And she had information, basic information about them, like when they were born and when they died. She didn't go beyond that. But I started digging into it more because I wanted to find out if there's a story here to be told. And so one of the things I did was I put down the names of the translators and I started stalking their descendants. And I put together their family trees. And I thought one of these days, I could work it out to meet some of these people and see if there are any family stories that talk about, the translation and this word homosexual and so forth, and how history went. And so in the process of stalking the descendants of the translators, I came across something that referred to 90 boxes of archived material at Yale University that was left behind by this translation team of 22 men. And so I thought, you know what? These are their notes. That's even better, because that's, talking to a descendant, it's third or fourth generation later, but seeing these notes there, that might even be better. So I called Yale to see what I could see about this online, and they said, you have to see this in person. Remember, this is 2017, so the summer of 2017, before COVID. And so they said, well, none of this is uploaded to our digital page and section that we have, so you have to come and see this in person. So what I did was I got a library card and got ready and excited about it and called Kathy, and she said, I'm going with you. So in the summer, I'm sorry, it was probably September of 2017. So that still is the summer of 2017. We went to Yale for 5 days, and we just wanted to dig through this to find any information that would help us to understand why they made this decision. And we knew that we were going to just be going through sections of notes and find things that were pertinent to our passage that we were looking at, because the first place it ends up is 1 Corinthians 6:9. So we wanted everything about 1 Corinthians 6:9, any topics of homosexuality that we might find in these notes. And they kept very good notes. They kept all their letters, they kept notes and pages there. We even found a grocery list. I mean, they kept everything. Really? So it was really good.
Wow.
So it was really fun. And we really got to know this translation team during the course of that time at Yale. And I think that's what was so interesting. And I think a lot of people, when they want to hear the behind the scenes parts of this particular trip, and I don't share about this in the movie. I mean, there's too much to put in the hour and a half
movie. I was just thinking that. I was like, wait, we're getting this,
Yeah, the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So the first 3 days, and you have to remember, so the way my mind works is I ask lots of questions and I look for those answers, and no one had looked into this question before because there's no book or anything on it at all. And I found out later a little bit more information on that, but I had to know. So I'm asking questions, and in the process, just the way my mind works is I create these potential ideas or theories. I had a theory that maybe the reason they did this, and looking at the timing, was because during this timing of the 1940s, late 30s, early 40s, we have World War II ending in the mid 40s. And so right after World War II ends, this is kind of the start of the modern day gay bar movement that we had. We had a few gay bars before, but after literally tens of thousands of soldiers get dropped off at major port cities, which would be LA, San Francisco, and New York, these soldiers, before they're celebrating, the war's over, they're home, they're back in their country, they're hanging around their comrades and really having a good time before they go back home to small town Kansas, Oklahoma, and so forth. They're getting to know each other, and they're getting to know a few things about themselves that they're realizing. And so some of these gay soldiers end up going to these gay bars and learning so much about themselves. And a lot of them ended up staying in some of these larger cities, which is why, we have larger populations of LGBT people in large cities compared to small towns.
Interesting. Okay. That makes so much sense.
And so in my mind, and what we see going on at that time in history is every now and then you would open up the newspaper and you would see 20 homosexuals were arrested last night on XYZ Street and put into jail. And so the way that they would deal with it, they saw it as, sexual deviance, and they considered it not a very good thing. It was not considered sinful at that time because the Bible had not yet been weaponized. And we can verify that through so many notes and so many sermons, because we even research sermons and messages to see how things are being seen in that particular area of society. But I had put together this theory that because these translators were exposed to these newspaper articles and all these people being arrested, and they saw this arsenokoitai and malakoi, these two Greek words, they might have drawn the conclusion there in this huge logical leap or illogical leap, and said, okay, homosexuality, boom, and plopped it in there. and basically a little nefarious. That's what I thought. Oh my goodness, that is not what I found. And
Really?
so, yes, they were not nefarious at all. These translators, these 22 men, were so godly and amazing and actually ahead of their time. And we found this because you really get to know someone when you dig into their notes, when you dig into their archives and their personal letters and their personal diaries and their personal pieces of information and newspaper articles and magazine articles about them. I mean, it was a gold mine that we found. So the great thing is we didn't find this until the third day of being in these archives, digging into the bowels of the library and not finding this answer until the third day got us a chance to get to know this team of translators. And I can tell you some of the things that we found. So there was this one letter that Dr. Weigel, so Dr. Luther Allen Weigel was the dean of the Yale Divinity School, and he wrote a lot of letters and he responded to everything people sent him. And so I found one letter where he was writing to this church and he said, you don't have any women on your committee, and you need to have women on your committee if you're going to represent the population of the church, because you're not getting the full understanding of what's going on there. And another letter he wrote to this church and said, you have no Black people on your committee, but yet you have Black people in your community.
Wow. In the 1940s, this was
30s.
Oh,
30s.
wow. Even more so. Right on.
Way ahead of his time. Way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
And this other letter was written by this woman, and she writes into Dr. Weigel, and she's basically saying, Dr. Weigel, remember, this is the 30s. I'm just a housewife. I can't really say anything, but you're the dean of the Yale Divinity School, and we have a problem in our community. Can you please write to Congress and let them know about this problem we have? And she went on to explain, we have a poll tax, and a poll tax means, voting polls. It's a tax to be able to vote. So she said, in order to register to vote, you have to pay $1 for a registration card in our community. And this was the 30s, so the Great Depression.
Big, yeah.
And she said, Dr. Weigel, if there are families that are so poor in our community, if they have $1, they're not going to spend it on a registration card. They're going to spend it on food for their family.
Yeah.
And as a result, these poor people are not able to vote, and they're not being represented in Congress appropriately. So could you please write Congress and let them know? And he wrote back to her, yes, ma'am, you are absolutely right. This is an injustice in the 1930s. And he wrote to Congress and told Congress about this. And ever since then, a poll tax is considered illegal.
Yeah.
Now they find other ways to do voter suppression these days,
right.
But a poll tax is not one of them. And
well, and just to put it in perspective, I think people were making like $2.50 a week back then.
It was very
so
low.
I mean $1.
I think even less. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
$2.50, you mean?
Yeah, $2.50 a week.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the wage of the day, but I do know $1 will go a long way. Because when I calculate things, I look at like the hourly wage and like how many hours do you have to work to get that same widget or that same meal. And so it was definitely a lot of money in the 30s. Yeah. And so I was like so excited about these guys. And we got to know this about them the first 3 days before we found that information. Before we found what really gave us the answer to what we were looking for, which is why did they decide to put the word homosexual in there in the Bible?
But I can't help but to see that as divine. I really can't, because if you would have found the information, you would have missed out on so much of their personalities and everything that they did. I mean, like I said, I can't help but think that that's more than just a coincidence or timing. That's truly divine, in my opinion.
And so I noticed for me and Kathy, we each have like a perspective of going in. She's going in as a straight cisgender white woman, and I'm going in as a gay Christian guy going in, seminary trained. And the way we're kind of looking at this is really a good balance. And so the first day I can remember we had this Airbnb, and every day we would walk from the Airbnb over to get our coffee and our juice, and we would drink that on the way to campus at Yale. And then we would walk into campus and dispose of our coffee cups, because you can't take those in. You can't take your jacket in. You can't take your pens and papers in. Wow. You have to only use their paper and their pencils to go into the archives. So they're very strict about that, which is really good because it maintains the legitimacy and the authenticity of the archives there. And so then we would go in, and it was just interesting. So on the first day, I can remember going home at the end of the day and feeling overwhelmed because we were looking for a needle in a haystack. And with 120,000 sheets of paper that we ended up having to go through, it was a very, very large haystack. Wow. And so I just felt overwhelmed, and we need more time, and what are we going to do? And keep in mind too, we're not looking for a discovery while we're there, because we're just taking pictures or copies of all the papers that we want to take home and dig in and study.
Yeah.
So we knew the goal, the name of the game is to get copies of as many pages as possible of the pertinent areas that we need. So like if we're in the book of Nehemiah, we don't need anything from Nehemiah to this topic because there's no indication from that. So we had our focus and we're going through that. And so the interesting thing is that was first day. The second day, they're getting ready to close the library, and I'm looking, and I feel like I'm just inches away from where I need to be in the archives. And we're almost there. And that was on the second day, which was Tuesday. So I said, tomorrow, I think we're going to find something because we're getting really closer. And on that day, I had actually discovered some, in addition to those 90 boxes of archived material, there was a whole chunk just as big as that on microfilm, but of different material.
Oh, wow.
And so we realized we had to study twice as many pieces of material that we originally thought. But remember, we're trying to key in on certain passages and certain topics. And so we went on that third day, and that's where we found what we found. And it was all found in an exchange of letters between this 21-year-old seminary student and the dean of the Yale Divinity School.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I had seen Kathy's posts about him passing before I knew who he was. So in the movie, when I was able to correlate who he was from Kathy's posts to what he represented in the whole historical aspect of this, it just hit me so much harder. Before it was like, oh, who is this guy? Oh, it was really important to Kathy, no idea, until it was then that it was like, oh my God, this guy changed everything. This guy changed everything. And if you hadn't, again, divinity, if you hadn't had someone find him, and I mean, tell everybody how hard it was to find him. What the only information?
Oh, that's a whole story in itself. Yeah, we don't share that in the movie because it's a whole story within itself. But basically, so we find this letter from this 21-year-old seminary student, and they go back and forth with these letters that they're writing. And basically, the seminary student challenges the translation team and says, I think you picked the wrong word when you picked the word homosexual, and I think you need to reconsider. And he had typed a 3-page letter, single-spaced, with an appendix attached at the end with resource materials that he had used for his study. And so I think he wrote an incredible letter. But the most exciting thing it caused the dean of the Yale Divinity School to reply and to explain his story about why they chose this word homosexual and how they got to that point. And that's where we found the gold. So the letter from David ignited that. And so basically what happens from there is we see Dr. Weigel write back and say, you know what, we need to look into this more. And they go back and forth on this, on their letters, as far as why is that not a good choice? And one of the things that David puts in his letter is he says, you know what, this is keep in mind, let me back up there a minute. This translation team only received 2 letters in the first decade after releasing this book, this new Bible, this new translation. And we know that they only received 2 letters because in David's letter, Dr. Weigel writes back and says, interesting that you asked this question about this passage and this word. We did have one other person ask this about 7 years ago. And then in the archives I'm digging through, I find the 7-year-ago letter from 1952. And then Kathy found the 1959. So we have 100% of the letters that are indicated. And Dr. Weigel even, and if Dr. Weigel wouldn't have added that sentence, we received one other letter about this. We might have thought that some had been lost to time. We could say they got angry about the homosexual question and they tossed the letters in the basket. Yeah. We could have gone a number of different ways, but the fact that everything in that letter is just divine, the way that Dr. Weigel wrote it, the way that David wrote back and forth and everything. And so it was just really interesting to see that interaction. And one of the things David writes in the letter, he said, if we have to realize, and he writes this in his letter, that some people come into this, homosexuality not by choice or anything they did, because they didn't think it was choice then. The word choice wasn't introduced until the 70s by 70s pastors who were saying, you choose to be gay. It was never part of the conversation before the 70s.
I always say they chose not to be gay. They really were. I mean, if you
yes, exactly.
You can choose not to do that, but you can't choose who you are. Yeah,
exactly. And so he basically, David writes in there, these people, find themselves in this particular situation. And he said, you added this word homosexual, and I'm afraid that if it's not corrected, that the Bible could be used as a sacred weapon to harm these people.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, sacred weapon. And so
it's exactly
Kathy
what happened.
Yeah, and that's why Kathy and I had good discussions, and that's why she's going to use that in the title of her book, Sacred Weapon: How the Bible Became Anti-Gay, because it didn't always be gay. It wasn't always gay. It became gay after certain theologians with bad theology got a hold of it and kind of changed a few things. But that's a whole other story within itself. So essentially, what we've got here is this interaction between this student and this seminary professor. And one of the things that I was really surprised by is this seminary professor is being challenged by a 21-year-old seminary student. If that happened today, we're going to see ego and pride get involved.
Totally.
It's not going to be a very pretty conversation. We're going to see doubling down. But Dr. Weigel was so smart that he didn't need to use the education card against the student. Instead, he had the humility to say, this is a good point. We need to look into this. And so they went back and forth and decided what direction to go. And they made a decision in the 60s to change the word homosexual because it is not the right word for this version. It is not for this verse. And in fact, some of the leading anti-gay theologians that I've talked to agree that homosexual is not the right word for that passage. So even anti-gay people that understand the Greek are admitting that the word homosexual should not be in there. And so what they did was they looked at various words that they had access to in the 1960s when they're trying to come up with a replacement. And so if you look at history and study history in the 60s, we have these men who would wear trench coats and walk up to a playground school,
Flashers.
a school playground full of kids, and flash themselves, right? A naked body behind their
I was subject to a few
trench
of
coat.
those as a child.
Oh, that's not good. Well,
No.
They started this term called sexual pervert to describe those people, right? Because, we would use the term flasher, but that's not exactly it. There's a category that describes what's going on because there's an abuse involved. And so they used the word sexual perverts in their next translation, and they voted vast majority to say, no longer are we going to use homosexual, we're going to use the word sexual pervert. And it returned the abusive nature of these Greek words to this verse. Because the abusive nature is in the King James even, because the King James says abusers of themselves with mankind. So it even has the word abusers in the verse. So we knew that there was an abusive nature to this arsenokoitai Greek word, malakoi. We knew that there was something bad in there. So to claim a whole group of people in that is just ridiculous because it's not utilizing and parsing the verses the right way. And so they returned it to an abusive nature, and we saw that kind of play itself out.
Well, one thing that the mistranslation did was vilify humans as opposed to an act. Like you said, it's a sexual perversion. It's the same with Sodom and Gomorrah being changed to a homosexual issue as opposed to cruelty to migrants. To change it from a person who was born this way from an act, I equated in my book as comparing rape and love.
Mm-hmm.
They're completely different. You can say, well, whatever. One is violence, one isn't. Sex is not rape. So to convolute those things made the church an enemy of so many humans, as opposed to, originally it was pederasty, right? Or it was sexual. I have a launch team for my book right now, and the part in there where I'm talking about sex with shrines. I got a message last night going, wait a minute, what? There's so many things that we twisted to apply someone who our society deemed that they were just different, and literally demonize them for who they are. It is as much as a Black person not being able to change themselves to white as it is with a gay person not being able to make themselves straight. And that break in science, logic, and all of that, my book is dedicated to a gay boy who killed himself over this shit. So, it is so destructive, so harmful, and children today are being told that they're an abomination just for being born. So you guys getting out there, putting this on film, Rocket, we have to mention Rocky. Rocky, another boss bitch. She was there, challenging her father, an evangelical pastor. And I mean, just the boldness to step out and say, this is all wrong. All of these beliefs are wrong. You can still choose to, people ask me about mine. So, well, what if I don't believe what you believe? That's fine. But the facts are the facts. You can believe anything you want to, but these are the facts. And that's what needs to be stepped up with. And that's what needs to get out there. If you still want to be a bigot and all of those things, then that's on you. Just don't blame God. Do not use the Bible as your sword.
Yeah. That's what I tell a lot of people. I say, if you want to be homophobic, go be homophobic. But don't you dare blame your reason on scripture, because you are not translating scripture accurately when you do that.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really gross. I mean, more people have been killed in the name of God than all natural disasters combined. So we've been doing this forever. And sadly, the LGBTQ plus community are the victims right now. It's just so disgusting. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so what happened, that was not the only archives we went to, and we've gone to several archives because we just started tracing and tracking what was going on and behind the scenes. And so I went to 7 translation note archives, 7 translations, 7 biblical translations. I've been to the archives of 7 translations.
Wow.
And so 3 of them told me I was the first person to ever ask to see any of their notes for any reason. So I would have thought this was the most crucial question the church is asking. Before we went to Yale, I would call them every other day. And are you sure we're going to be there? Are you sure nobody else is going to be checking this stuff out? We're coming all the way from California. We all the way to the East Coast. And, what if somebody else checks out this material? Because I figured there was a group of people, theologians, standing in line to access these translation notes. I was so wrong. Yeah. And in fact, one of the translation notes we were at, there was a package that had been mailed. So it was stamped in 1968, I believe, 67 or 68. And it had been mailed, and it had, a rough draft of the translation, and nobody had opened it since that time. So I just started tearing up. I said, Kathy, nobody cared about us enough to check this out. They just took it for their pastor's word that this is in the Bible now, so let's move on with it. There's no questioning. And it just seems like common sense. We have to remember the Bible itself is a joint venture between a holy and perfect divine God and imperfect humans who make mistakes.
And our translations of that, our interpretations, our knowledge, all of that.
The translations that have been happening for the past 2,000 years rely upon these imperfect humans to translate and to transmit throughout time. So we have to be careful not to put more faith in the translator than the creator.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that is such a valid point, because we put so much faith into man that, I mean, when I was writing the section, God Loves the Gay, in my book, I had written 9 pages because I knew what I was talking about. And then I went to go get citations and link it all together. And I was sitting there going, oh my God, this is all wrong. I looked at the spilling of the seed. All of this stuff that had nothing to do with the LGBTQ community, but that I was assured my entire life and education and all that growing up, that gay was bad because you were wasting your seed. So, all of these things that we think that we know, we don't. I've been doing this for 25 years and I'm still finding stuff that I thought I knew, but was totally wrong.
Well, keep in mind that they did think that spilling the seed was a bad thing. And we have to remember why. Because in historic times and ancient times, the thinking was that the seed, the semen from the man, is the entire human, the baby.
Yes.
And it's being planted in the fertile planting ground of the woman. So they didn't think that there was any DNA coming from the woman. And the only way the woman participates is that she's the fertile planting ground. So this is the man's kid, not the woman's kid. It's the man's kid. The woman is just responsible for fertilizing this child and, raising this child and feeding and nurturing this child, was kind of the thinking. And so we didn't know it took a sperm and an egg to make a baby until the 1880s.
Yeah, but the whole thing with Odin is that he was actually raping his sister-in-law. He was
Oh, yeah.
supposed to be getting her pregnant. I mean, it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the LGBTQ
Right.
community. Nothing.
No. Right.
And so that, I mean, it was like, wait a minute here. I mean, I'm sure you had those revelations going, wait, whoa, how did this, And again, because we are relying on men's translations, men's understanding, egos, and everything else involved, I mean, it's a telephone game all over again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's really sad when we see what has transpired. And I think I was talking with some people. I was at the QCF conference this last weekend, and was talking with some people. And one of the things that's very interesting is that, those of us that are raised in the church, and when we hear a pastor start to read a verse or recite a verse, in our mind, we're already finishing that verse, and we can tell you 12 sermons from that verse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's just like natural. And so, but that doesn't give us a fresh perspective. What if we're regurgitating something from the pulpit
Totally.
and it's not from the Holy Spirit and actually from Scripture? And so as a result, one thing I've noticed is when we go to these 6 clobber passages, 3 in the Old Testament, 3 in the New Testament, you start reading them, instantly everybody goes to this homophobic mentality, and yeah, they do this, and it's not in God's will, and it's bad. And they go to 12 unsubstantiated reasons why gay is bad. And then, but the problem is, if we've been misinterpreting these passages
Exactly.
for that period of time, then what is actually in that passage in the first place that we're actually missing? And I think in my own personal life, in my own story, one of the things that I noticed was I went through a period of time during deconstruction when I had a hard time going to church. I had a hard time reading my Bible, opening it and hearing worship songs. And I went through a period of time as I used to go read the Bible every day and have Bible study, personal Bible study every day. And I went through a time when I just can't do it. I just can't do it. And so as I started going back, coming out of this slump and coming back in to my walk with God, I went back to these passages. And now that I went in it with a bigger perspective of who God is, and God is in a much bigger box than what I was putting him in, I was seeing stuff in these passages that I had never seen before. And as much as I love the Bible, my mom used to talk about how I really love the Bible. I got my first Bible, I think, when I was in 2nd grade. And I went and took it and just started reading through. I was so excited. And just how much I love Scripture and God's Word. And I went to seminary, and it's just exciting for me. Even as excited as I had been for most of my life about that, I realize now I was reading the Bible in black and white when it's been color all along.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing things in the Bible that I couldn't see before because I was blinded by certain ways that I was putting God in this box. So I go to these clobber passages now, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if we continue to use these as clobber passages, it's misdirecting us from what's really there. I mean, if I were Satan, that'd be my strategy. Let's bash the gays, and then they won't see what's really going on in this passage. And to see what's really going on in these passages has made me crazy excited now.
Well, and my brain always plays the devil's advocate. Well, if I'm saying this, what is the argument? How does that work? So when I discovered that there was an alteration, I started looking for the word homosexual back in those days. So, what were they called back then? What were they? Because the Greeks had words for everything, right? And they already had man with man with, they already had those terms. So, Paul introducing I always screw up this word, the A one.
Arsenokoitai.
Thank you. My mouth won't work right with it. There were already words for homosexuality that were being used, that were widely used. All of that was done. So for him to even need to have a new word, it had to mean something else. If there were already words and definitions and everything that included the LGBTQ community, then arson could not be it. I understood Malachi for the softness. Jesus used that and all of those types of things. But again, when I was like, okay, well, what does this mean? How does this go? I looked and said, what were they doing back then? And it just sealed it. I mean, the other thing for me that sealed it was gay animals. I mean, there are so many gay animals that science is just now discovering. So that had to lend to the natural part of this. It
Yeah.
couldn't be an abomination, because if so, we wouldn't have these animals everywhere.
Yeah.
And then
One
I
thing,
went down
Kat.
the animal streak and got way wigged out. They are
Yeah, there's a lot.
wicked.
Did you run into that the gay penguin couple that raised their baby?
This was before then.
Okay.
I came across, I mean, in my naivety, I didn't know that reindeers were a term. And the actual reindeer, they are way freaky. I mean, they love their same-sex unions, and it's like 35%.
I didn't hear about that. Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
I haven't gone down that rabbit hole yet.
Be prepared, because I was like, damn, animal porn. It was. I definitely felt. I don't blush it much. That shit made me blush. I was like, okay. But we couldn't have a God who created all of these creatures and only had rules for us that didn't apply to them. It was okay for, you know, for these animals. I mean, it's a 3 to 25% average, with same in humanity. To see all these things. I mean, I always look to nature, because that's how I think that we can truly understand God, without the egos, without our impressions and those things. Right. So once I saw that there were gay animals, and that it was so widespread, and not, I was told that my aunt had gay cats when I was growing up, but I was also told that was because there was just no boy around. You know, and so that was one of the other things that I had to look into, you know, is like, well, is it just because of a lack of a mate? No. The animal kingdom is far more gay than any bit of humanity, and they just love it. I mean, they get so to prove, so it was totally man-made. It was totally man's impression and judgment on this, when there's no logic to it whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that Kathy and I have noticed is that they keep moving the goalpost. Yeah. So there's this, you know, the conversation that's been going on between affirming and non-affirming theologians over the past several years. They just keep moving the goalpost. So it's really easy to kind of show that the Sodom and Gomorrah story is not about a same-sex committed,
very easy
relationship. It's very easy to kind of go down that path. And then when you actually do a complete understanding, a complete deep dive on the word Sodom, sodomy, and sodomite throughout the whole Old and New Testament, then you're like, oh my goodness, this had nothing to do with same-sex activity. You know, Ezekiel 16:49 talks about what they were guilty of, and it had nothing to do with same-sex activity.
No.
And so as a result, when we see, well, they're like, okay, we can't use Sodom and Gomorrah anymore in our conversation. So they start finding another verse, and they kind of twist that around a little bit to accommodate. And so one of the conversations we've seen, if we look at the 1 Corinthians 6:9 verse, there are the two Greek words, malakoi and arsenokoitai, which in 1946 were combined to create the word homosexual. And so I can show you, I have tons of old books and commentaries to show you there was nothing about homosexuality in those verses until the late 1800s. And so malakoi, in fact, it gives definitions about being a coward. You're not willing to fight in war. You're not looking out for your country and your
morally soft
tribe. Yeah, exactly. And so we can kind of see that. But the interesting thing is, as they move the goalpost, and as we defend by using logic and language and history and culture and accurately looking at these verses, we see these non-affirming theologians come with another argument. Well, how about this? It's like they'll throw something else at it. And so you'll see in the ESV, the English Standard Version Bible, in the subnotes at the bottom, it says, when it talks about these two Greek words, malakoi and arsenokoitai, it uses this sentence that it says, well, this is explaining, and they don't say this could be explaining because they've got too much of an ego. They said, this is talking about the passive and active partners in a homosexual relationship. So, you know, we call it top and bottom in certain cases, but the passive and active partners in a homosexual relationship. So here's the thing. Number one, there are Greek words for the passive and active partners in a homosexual relationship.
Exactly.
And malakoi and arsenokoitai, they are not. Number one. Number two, I have a friend who's a theologian over in Norway. And so she did a study to look at the first 1,000 years from the time of Christ for 1,000 years later. These two words, arsenokoitai and malakoi, how many Greek documents are these paired up? Because if it means active and passive or top and bottom, then we would expect to see malakoi and arsenokoitai together and multiple Greek documents
Yes.
when we're talking about same-sex
It's
activity.
not.
So she did this study that went through 1,000 years worth of Greek documents, and she found of all the documents where these two words are paired up together, we only find them paired together in 1 Corinthians 6.
Yeah.
Within a 10-word radius. So how can we make such a blanket statement about something active and passive when the only place it's found is in 1 Corinthians 6:9? And remember, Paul is attributed the authorship, being the author of 1 Corinthians. He's also attributed to being the author of 1 Timothy. If we go to 1 Timothy, we find arsenokoitai, but no malakoi. So it's like if they're partners in pairs, even Paul didn't even acknowledge that, right?
How dare you have logic? How dare you have logic? It's not there. There, I say in the book, the LGBTQ community is not new. The church's hatred for it is. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, current era, there were one set of lesbian saints and 2 sets of gay saints. We have the story of the centurion broken down to it really meant his lover. There's lots of proof. We just take it and want to use it as clobber passages. We want our ego to say we are better than you. You are a sin. They literally said the same thing about Black people for 5,000 years. They were marked. They were there to be. And now, unfortunately, I think our minds are getting smaller, our egos are getting bigger, and we are just targeting anybody else that we can. I mean, the trans community is like 0.03%, and they've had more laws against them in the last 2 years than anything else that's going on. This is on us. This is not God. God didn't do any of this crap. This is all us making a click out of religion and getting out there to hate our neighbor instead of love them. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry. No passionate.
Makes sense.
So one of the things, other than knowing that David had passed, that really just made my heart hurt in the movie was when you said that you had rejected relationships and any physical touch because of this. That hurt me so much because I am one that says that love is the reason we're here, and without, a life without love is no life at all. Have you been able to reconcile that at all, or are you still dealing with that, throughout all of this?
I'm gonna be working on that, and so that's
no pressure. No pressure.
So we'll see. I mean, God's in control, and I'm fine with that.
So we have a couple more minutes. What is like the big lesson that you have learned since the movie ended that's not included in it?
I think that I don't know if I can say the lesson that I've learned. The lesson that I've learned is that humans have made a debacle of what's really going on in some of these passages. And this is just a small issue that they changed that caused a huge problem. So I think some people are afraid that just means, well, maybe the whole Bible's wrong. And it's like, no, I'm not challenging the whole Bible. And I don't think the whole Bible's, and I don't think we have that many mistakes. I just think that we need to be more cognizant that people can cause damage, and to look at that and to be responsible and to have the humility to say, what if we made a mistake here? And then to kind of go through there. So I think it's made me a lesson. I would say I learned is just that it's excited me for my own life to kind of see this is man's mistake, not God's mistake, not God's opinion.
Yeah.
About gay people. So
Rocky's in Europe. Kathy's doing seminars. You guys have been up for awards. This movie's taking off worldwide. What's up next? Are we going to have a massive release? I know you just did the free week, right? Where everybody could stream it. What's going on?
Yeah, for 3 weeks.
We'll do this.
So as far as the film is concerned, Rocky would be better able to answer that question because essentially she's trying to work through a deal that's going to make it more accessible to most people in most parts of the world is kind of the goal. So she's not looking to sell it to the highest bidder
No,
or
I
to
know
make
that.
money
Yeah.
off of it. In fact, she's going to lose money. This movie cost me a lot. I'm not making any money off of it, but boy, it costs a lot to do research, and that was my involvement there. So the next step is to make sure the movie can get into the most hands of the most people throughout the world and help start the healing process and the education process to help parents understand a little bit better so they can treat their kids with something that is more godly and have a more godly approach toward their children in this kind of a situation, to help the churches to create safer spaces for LGBT people and realize that, no, we don't hate the church. In fact, it could be argued that we might love the church more than the average person in their pew because we're willing to stick around even when all this false information about us is being said. So I think that that's the next step. So getting the movie out is the next step. And then over the next few months, so Kathy and I were originally going to do a book together, and there's so much information. So we split it into 2 books. So she's going to do book 1, and that's coming out in the next few months. And so that's going to she involves a lot of history and culture and language a little bit, but more politics and things kind of coming into that. And I'm more into the theology portion of it and how it's been transmitted through the theological circles throughout the last 2,000 years. So, it's kind of a 1-2 approach, I would say.
I love that.
My book would not be coming out for another year to a year and a half after hers. And part of that reason is to be strategic, because we want to see how the movie's going to play out and what theologians and pastors do with it, what they do with her book. And then I want to make sure I have proper responses in mind, because if I get my book done now and put it out there, I'm not going to have the response
exactly
as much as if we let them kind of go first and kind of put it out their hand and see what happens. And then I can go in there and kind of clean up any loose ends that we might want to, seeing what's going on and going forward from there.
One thing that forever endeared me to Rocky was having the conversation about money. And I have always said, I only want to sell 1 million books to change the world. And she said the same thing. So, it's not a matter of money, it's change, it's awakening, it's knowledge, I was like, me too. That's what counts. That's where, that's worth anything that money can buy. That is, changing the world, stopping the hate, all of that is worth so much more. And when she said that, I was like, yeah, girl. Yeah, I love that. So that's awesome. Well, like I said, Kathy's already committed to being here once the book gets out in the spring. So we will definitely have to have you guys back on to talk about it then.
Yes.
Everybody. So is the live stream still going on? The free live stream?
It ended on Sunday. It ended a couple days ago.
Okay. Yeah. Well, people, you can go to your churches. You can go to, civil centers, contact Rocky, hit her up on IG. Get this all over. When I posted the link for the show, I got so many messages saying, I just saw this at my church 2 weeks ago, or I saw it then. The word needs to be spread. We need to stop the hatred. We need to stop all of this crap, because it's just wrong. It's just wrong. Right. People are people.
And if anybody's in Southern California, if they want to attend live, the last 2 Sundays of February, I'm going to be leading a 2-part series, 2 hours each. So it's going to be 4 hours of instruction on LGBT theology and kind of taking a deeper dive on a lot of these. When Kathy and I do our sessions, it's 17 hours over a course of 2 or 3 days. Wow. But this is going to be 4 hours over a course of 2 days. So the last 2 Sundays of February, we'll get some information out. Eventually you can post it. I'll post it, and 1946 website will post it to let people in Southern California know if they want to attend that.
Yep, I will be there.
Awesome.
So any final words, and where can people find you?
Final words are, I am just one person who had a question, who dug in and ended up finding this amazing information. There are still other questions that haven't even been asked, much less been researched. So people out there listening to your podcast, maybe they have a question and maybe they can dig in and we find another piece to this puzzle that will help really solidly put the firm answer of what God's really saying when he's looking at LGBT people, and we can be seen more accurately from the church. So I would like to say, there are people listening that might end up in the next documentary that takes this to the next level, and let's continue to seek and to search. I'm excited about so many other things that I think I would love to dig into and research if I had the time, and libraries and archives that I would love to dig in and find out what pieces of the puzzle are residing in those archives. But I think that's what's next, and that's what I'm excited about.
Fantastic. And people can find you on Facebook. Are you on any other social media?
So Facebook, I don't have a huge social media presence right now, just Facebook, Ed Oxford. So I'll post some things there from time to time, and we're going to be posting some things up and coming. I'm probably going to be doing TikTok and Instagram more in March, April, May, and getting some things out there. But in the meantime, I've got to continue my full-time job because that's what pays the bills. So
I have been saying I'll get on TikTok in the next 60 days for like 2 years. It's still really bad, and I don't have it. So I feel you there. Ed, thank you so much for your friendship and for being on this show and spreading the word. It has been absolutely wonderful. And I will continue pushing your movie because it rocks.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm going to send you backstage and close the show. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you.
You guys, you really have to go see this movie. You really do. I heard a lot of grief before it came out with people saying, no, the Bible hates us anyway. So why would I ever do anything to, no. People, man has done this. Humans have done this, not a supreme being. If a supreme being is an asshole, it's not supreme. That's just the way it goes. And speaking of that, I have my book coming out. It will be out around April timeframe. So stay tuned for that. I cover all of this stuff and further the message of love. Next week, we have Sarah Cunningham coming back from Free Mom Hugs. And she is going to tell us all of the really cool things that are happening with Free Mom Hugs right now. It's really cool stuff that's happening. So you like the show? Share it, subscribe, all that good stuff. I will talk to you next week. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful week. And as always, walk in love. Mwah! See you then.